love your suit.
Hello, beautiful people. I am Oliver Perrin, and you are joining us within a safer space. I am together with Mr. Tim Rudisil today, and the subject of our discussion will be the future of Poland and the other V4 countries, including Hungary, Czech Republic, and Slovakia. Now, I have not done a great deal of research in preparation for this. I think what I'm after in speaking with Tim about it is sort of a 30,000-foot view of coming changes. In particular, we have the business of the EU attempting to pressure these smaller countries. There are some notable events going on now in Poland where they're trying to change the Supreme Court there in Poland, which has been packed with activist judges. I'm not really well informed about it, but from what I can see on the surface, it seems that they have changed some laws, I imagine in the legislature, that determine how long justices can stay in place. So they've essentially reduced the retirement age, as best I can understand it, which would lead to, I think, a third of the judges having to go their way and creating an opportunity to replace them with judges that, for example, aren't the sort that Soros likes to pack the legislative side of countries with, the judicial side of countries with, pardon me. At the same time, they're doing similar things at the same time, the EU is going after the right of each of these nations to conduct their affairs as they see fit. So in the case of Hungary, there's some stuff going on with a case related to Croatia, where Hungary wanted to drop the case and did, based on its own internal decisions, and the Europeans, the EU people are saying, no, you can't do that. And I think back in Croatia, I didn't see all the details. There's another one where the Poles want Ireland to extradite someone to Poland. And the European Union is saying, no, that Ireland needs to take into account the fact that anyone who gets returned to Poland to face trial or go to court or whatever may well be deprived of due process and, not be subject to real justice. So there are a bunch of games going on with the EU trying to put pressure on these V4 countries through the legal system. At the same time, they're doing it economically. They're playing all sorts of games because they know that the jig might soon be up in terms of their overreaching and attempting to put into place a higher federal power to control these sovereign nations, which had initially come together under an economic banner. But of course, these guys want to create the United States of Europe, get you to sing a European anthem, salute a flag that's blue that has a bunch of yellow stars on it, have their own army, all this other crap. So against that background, we know about the kind of conflict going on within the European Union countries, where the Western ones, ones like France and Germany, are attempting to use their power to bully the ones in the East. But we also have the changing geopolitical situation where, for example, Trump is talking about the possibility of moving U.S. troops out of Germany and over into Poland, which puts them closer to where they would be needed as the first line of defense if anything were to happen with Russia, and NATO's traditional role is to help with that. We had Trump also mentioning shortly before meeting Putin that Germany basically screwed Poland, not to mention screwed the Ukraine and some of these other Eastern European countries when it agreed to allow the Russians to build a pipeline around those Eastern European countries directly into Germany, which is essentially a way of screwing over their Eastern European partners, some of whom are also in NATO. So there's quite a bit going on there with the U.S. bringing pressure to bear. In addition to this pressure being brought to bear by the U.S., on some of these bad actors within the EU who are trying to bully others, most notably Germany, of course. There is also the other side of things, which is Russia itself. So these Eastern European countries are the ones that have very recent and very vivid memories of being sort of crushed under the boot of the Russians, and they don't want to have it happen again. The Hungarians, of course, do not. The Czechs do not. The Slovaks do not. The Poles do not. And so you would think that these are countries that are going to be aligned against Russia in order to keep them at bay. And yet the reality, the geopolitical reality of where they're located and their relative strengths vis-a-vis Russia mandates that they're always going to be like a gear in the transmission of Russian power projected westward. So they almost can't get out of it. So the EU itself is under increasing pressure from Russia and the US, who are kind of coming together and making some decisions apparently about how to carve it up. They're in their initial stages, but it seems like it's happening. You would think that the Eastern Europeans would be like a bulwark against the Russians, and yet geopolitically, I have very real questions about whether they're going to be able to pull that off just because of the facts on the ground, or as you would say, how the stones are laid out on the board. So what I'm after in this discussion, and I'll wind up now, is your thoughts on the future of Poland and these other V4 countries, given the changes that we see coming. What is likely to happen there? What the hell's going on? How will the U.S. and Russia carve this up? And how will these
Will the U.S. and Russia be allowed to carve it up? Or will the V4 countries step in and say, oh, my goodness, China, how good to see you?
There is the third leg of that stool, and that's what makes it interesting.
The third leg of that stool.
For my part, I am not entirely sure that the Russians and Americans would permit that extension of Chinese power into the heart of Europe.
Will they risk World War III over it?
I do not know. I guess I'll turn it over to you now, Mr. Tim.
Interesting idea, Ollie.
One particular point to note, though, is that I did a bit of background research on it for another clip, and the Poles have been cooperating with the Chinese for a long time. Because back in the days before they had reintegrated with the West, while they were still, part of the Warsaw Pact and all the rest, they had all kinds of trade relationships and diplomatic relationships with China.
Got a lot of pork going with China, have they? Pork, pigs. Pigs in China are very big, you know.
But I have not looked at how China and Hungary are doing.
They're doing well together. Doing well. You got to remember that Mr. Orban is very, very well suited to playing Russia, the U.S. against China, and China against Russia and the U.S. There's nothing there. All he's got to do is last out the EU, which is going to fold within the next couple of years.
At least in its current
That's all
form.
he's got to do. Well, yes, of course. Mr. Soros is unable to keep it going. Mr. Soros is unable to keep much of anything going. He's being thrown out of everywhere, right and left. That's why he gave the $18 billion to Open Society.
Now, just as a quick aside, would you say that the primary partner of Soros is China? Or is it possible to say that he has a primary partner?
It's possible to say he has a number of primary partners.
And
mostly they're other billionaires, some of which are Chinese. But do not confuse being of a nationality with having that nation's best interests at heart. I mean, after all, look at Chuck Schumer. He's American. Who more American than Schumer? And yet Schumer does not have America's best interest at heart. He has China's best interest at heart.
And presumably that sort of dissonance would be magnified as one gets up to the peaks of billionaire heights.
Billionaires don't owe any allegiance to any nation state, they think.
Yeah, it brings me back to that remark about by Jefferson regarding merchants. Yes.
Hmm. Yeah. See, the problem is that no matter how you want to slice this up, you've got a good bit of merchant prince, merchant prince involved in this. Now, merchant princes are cute people, but they have yet to understand the nature of how the world actually runs. You see, merchant princes can buy certain things from people. They can buy certain things from governments. What they cannot buy is a safe place to be, not in a world such as we operate in today. They think they have found one in the United States. That's why we have several Chinese billionaires living here. They think they found one in Canada. That's why they have several Chinese billionaires living there and a number of millionaires. But you see, the thing is that their assets can be seized, their persons can be seized, everything they own can be seized. They can be put in there ain't no safe place to go situations very quickly. This is what Mr. Orban is counting on because he wants to see Hungary made safe. He wants to see the Hungarian citizenry made safe. This is what Mr. Orban's deepest wish is, that his people should be allowed to live as Hungarians, separate from but equal to the Poles, separate from but equal to the Serbians, and so on and so on. He does not wish to see them subservient to anyone, most especially not an EU. Now, the EU wants to pose itself as a fourth leg to this stool. It cannot be. The EU has no power, no reserves, no nothing. All it's got is a whole bunch of pomp, circumstance,
Infrastructure and a massive migration and birth rate problem.
basically. Now, the
It puts me in mind of the old days, with the Crimean War, where you had the Russians versus the French and the Brits, and then the Brits allied with the Ottomans. And in the midst of all that, the Danubian principalities, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, always played this balancing act. It's very interesting to look at what, the combination of Austria and Hungary once upon a time as a bloc, because it's geographically close to what we're talking about with the B4. And so certain realities must remain the same. Historically, they had to affect some sort of balancing act of their own. And today they're being forced to do the same thing. Sorry, I just wanted to insert that.
That's quite all right. It's actually saves me a good bit of time because that's what they're doing. They're balancing between the three legs of the stool. And they're going poo, 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 poo at the EU. The Hungarians and the Poles have both told EU basically to suck a fart. Just pucker up and suck the motherfucker. Because there's nothing they can do.
And yet
there's
at the
nothing
same time,
EU can do.
They are very careful to never say they want to dissolve the EU. They speak the language of reform. They're rather like an Erasmus rather than a Luther, right? They talk about how things should be straightened out within Europe, but obviously it serves them as relatively small countries, though fairly large in the case of Poland, but still compared to a Russia, a China, or the U.S. or the rest of the Western EU nations assembled against them for the moment. It serves their interest to remain within the EU, but their object seems to be, in addition to securing their national security and futures, each one of them independently, they all seem to be focused on keeping the EU around, which is another part of this story that we should bear in mind when looking at the extrapolation.
Well, they want to bring all of the EU to bear on each of these questions because they're doing the same thing the EU is trying to do to them, which is confuse and confabulate the issues by saying, oh no, the EU can't do that. Hungary, as a country of its own, will never give in to immigration quotas, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. No. It would be too quick and easy to say, fuck you very much. We don't care to play. They want to play. But they want to play in a drama that allows China to take an equal part with Russia and the United States. That's the thing that nobody has considered, is China.
In the heart of Europe.
Exactly. Set right in between Europe and Russia.
And thereby, right in between U.S., NATO, and
Oh, really? You don't suppose that's why our boy Trump wants that money, do you?
Which?
Well, no,
the NATO money?
No. Yes. That's why he wants NATO to cough up its dues. It's 2%. He and Russia are playing a game with NATO. Russia has no desire to invade any country. That's the first thing that must be understood.
Yeah, what the fuck do they need more territory for? Even with all the talk about how the various stands have been peeled off and Belarus and the rest, the reality is they still have control to a considerable extent with all those countries, and they can open it up or dial it back or do whatever they want across centuries if they wish to. There's plenty of territory within which to play.
And damn small population, eh? Of course, there are about to be 15,000 brand new citizens in Russia.
Yes, the Boers.
Good old
coming
Boers,
there.
yes.
The region of Krasnodar, I think it is. But yeah, former Circassian territories up there just north and to some extent maybe
good
a little
farmland,
east,
eh?
a little west,
Good
I should
farmland.
say, of the Caucasus.
Yeah.
Very good.
Mm-hmm.
Boers can farm the fuck out of that.
Yes, I rather think so. Especially since there'll be no one to interfere with them, eh?
And after having dealt with the situation they faced in South Africa, they're more than ready with their lager mentality to deal with whatever the minor distractions would be coming from like Russian organized crime.
Yeah, I think so, yes.
Yeah, they know how to deal with that shit.
Yes, I think so. On top of which, you've got all of the Hungarian and Polish, etc. pig farmers. You see, the largest pig farming operation in the world, the one that's in the United States, tried to buy Poland's pig farms, and Poland told them no.
And who is that outside of the West, so to speak, the European diaspora, that really eats a lot of pig? Golly, I wonder.
One wonders. Yes, indeed.
That would be China. But now, does that mean that we're seeing the intentional formation of a détente where Russia and... Well, let me think about it. If Russia's on one side, you have the V4, which is going to be dealing to a certain extent with the U.S., because Poland's a part of NATO, and it makes sense for the U.S., for example, to do as they're threatening to do, which is to move their troops over into Poland, which creates an odd sort of relationship vis-a-vis Germany as well, because it changes the balance of power there slightly.
It does, more than slightly.
So you have the projection of NATO's military power into Central and Eastern Europe, or the shifting of many of its assets more significantly into that area. And yet you have the incursion of the Chinese economically, in terms of trade, commerce, infrastructure, and the rest, putting a buffer between NATO and Russia. But it's a very confusing little bit there, because is Russia willing to let China come up into there?
Doesn't really have much choice. One belt, one road, you know.
Yeah, but the Russians are pretty fucking formidable. I mean, yes, their economy is, as everyone's talking about now, the size of the state of New York, but they're a massive landmass. They've got quite effective intelligence services that have had long practice in this. They still have a very significant military. I would expect that if it suited Russia, they could fuck up the one belt, one road thing endlessly. It just seems that it doesn't, as you've noted in the past, because why not let the Chinese build all that infrastructure and just come take it later?
Yes, exactly. Why wouldn't you want the Chinese building all this stuff? All this infrastructure that you know can't stand. You know it cannot stand.
At least not
The
stand
Chinese
with
are,
in the grasp of the Chinese. Eventually, it'll just be wrenched out of it.
exactly so. Just as the Kenyan railroads will eventually be wrenched out of the hands of the Chinese into the hands of the Kenyans. It's typical, old son. The Chinese are booking a real live loser in this, but that's all right. They should. At the same time, they should be allowed to bring in as many of these improvements as they wish, especially as, golly gee, you need to be able to ship that pork to China quick. One belt, one road does that, doesn't it? Yes. But you see, China is backing all these immigration people, though it's not known. China is backing them like a motherfucker. And yet, they're not backing them into Poland or Hungary. That's odd, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes. That in and of itself bears consideration.
Yeah, I rather think it does. Yes, I rather think it does. But then I'm a man who watches the placement of pebbles on a board. I don't really have that much interest in geopolitics, you know. Hmm. I see these people having the stones change on them. You see, the major thing that China wants is to back Poland, Hungary, etc., to the point that it makes Russia have to dance and jiggle a bit. Now, Russia knows what's happening. That's why it put in the gas lines going around Hungary and Poland, going through the North Sea. That's fine. That's fine.
And they're working,
thing,
on coming around on the southern end, which has to do with Syria and Cyprus. Yes. And, stronger connections with Turkey, however fleeting those might be. Or at least however fleeting those relationships might be in any sense where Turkey can be called a partner rather than a flunky.
Well, they have to get someone new in there as soon as Erdogan has served his complete function. You see, the thing is that Erdogan was never supposed to be a long-term president for Turkey. Erdogan is a fool. Erdogan has put in all the things that make him disposable, completely disposable. How much difference would it make if somebody, aside from Erdogan, were president of Turkey?
An enormous amount of difference.
Would it really? I do not think so.
You don't think that the trajectory that has developed for Turkey in the last 10 to 15 years would be
Would
changed by
not
swapping
change
out?
one iota.
So you think the Ataturk experiment is dead?
Oh, yes. Dead and stinking. Now, they may bring forth someone who wants to play Ataturk. That's fine. Let him. But he will play it the way his Soviet master, his Russian masters want him to.
So you think Turkey has ultimately now fallen to Russia after centuries of fighting it off?
Yes. And I think that Turkey has been allowed to demand all the changes necessary to bring about a brand new Turkey dominated by Russia. Come on, Ollie. What are those pipelines for? Golly, we're just running that natural gas right through Turkey. We're just borrowing the land.
He who controls the spice controls the universe. Okay, well, now let's bring it back around. We've had to talk about the placement of these stones, so to speak, around this V4 region. One that particularly stands out is Iran as well, because Iran is providing energy both to China and to Europe. But I want to try, because we could easily expand, and in some respects it's necessary, much wider than this picture of Eastern Europe, but to whatever extent it's possible, and Central Europe, but to whatever extent it's possible, what can we say about how all of this is going to shape the future of Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Hungary?
Well, Iran is going to fall. That's a given. The imams, etc., are going to take a bad, bad fall. I expect to see Iran tied up in its own underwear here shortly, for quite some time, until Russia manages to bring out the new fellow, the hinterland prophet, you see.
So you think a
who
deal
gets
has been
everybody
struck
squared away.
to where you think some sort of deal has been struck where in the future what happens is Turkey is no longer the sick man of Europe, but is within the sphere of influence of Russia as well as Iran.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I think
so
Iran will be in the sphere of influence of Russia as well. Go ahead.
Right. And so part of the necessity for bringing down Iran is to cut out the Chinese influence there.
Yes, yes, that's been done by taking North Korea off the board.
Yeah, and it has interesting implications for the One Belt, One Road, because, you know, breaking out on the western end of the One Belt, One Road is going to require Azerbaijan, Iran, Turkey, something like that, if they're going to do the rail part of it. So it seems like Russia's going to say, no, the western end of your One Belt, One Road lies with us. Unless they come around with the seaborne trade, which is what they're trying to do with alternatives for the Suez Canal and coming up the Eilat Ashdod route through Israel.
It's going to be brought through as a new sick man of the Middle East. Persia, Iran, is going to need some help. And so it'll receive the help from China.
And yet, Russia will maintain the significant control.
Of course.
So once again, allow Chinese to load in and pay for the infrastructure and development.
I think so. I think so.
And so coming back around to our V4?
The V4 is going to sit there and try to melt this situation for all it can get. As far as Chinese influence and money and economics go, but not as far as real Chinese influence.
Right, so the military aspect, it seems as though the V4, at least Poland, is very much trying to stay within the NATO framework. And that really is more about the UK and the US than it is about the EU.
Exactly.
So basically,
that's their counterbalance.
give the Chinese a free pass in terms of economic development, but try to stick with the North Atlantic powers in terms of security.
Yeah. And the Chinese will go for it for a while at least, until they find out how many of their pebbles have changed color.
And how interesting the way that then encircles Europe, because the Western countries of Europe have been trying to sort of cut their own path while getting, for example, the U.S. to pay for it, as Trump continues to trumpet. They will now be surrounded by Brexit, UK that is out of the system, that ties back in with the Commonwealth globally, Canada, the US, the rest, on the western side, and they'll have the V4 countries on the eastern side. And of course, as you get up towards the Arctic and the rest, you've got Russia poking down in Kaliningrad and the rest, exercising its influence across that range that used to be controlled by the Hansa. So what does that leave for Europe? It leaves extension southward into North Africa. And we've got the pretext for that in the form of the many, many, many migrants who will need to be repatriated, and the migrant processing centers that will have to be established in North Africa.
That's going to fold up fairly rapidly. I expect to see about 2 or 3 years of that, maybe 4 or 5. And then all of that will fold up and everybody will just be pushed back.
So who will run North Africa ultimately? You see, I'm trying to figure out, because we know that the North will be controlled by Russia or NATO of Europe. The East will be controlled by NATO in terms of security, North Atlantic powers, not these EU powers. The West will be blocked off and hemmed in, so to speak, by the UK, the North Atlantic powers. That leaves only the South.
Who's trying to get in on the South as hard as they can go, Oliver? Who's building all those railroads? Oh, bullshit. Who's building all those railroads? Who's got billions of dollars? You don't necessarily go into the place that you're trying to take. You make it come to you.
Okay, so the sub-Saharan development by China basically makes North
Africa.
Where
are all these refugees coming from? Where are all these refugees coming from?
The majority of them
coming out of the Sahara?
South of it.
Oh, sub-Saharan. Down there where the Chinese are, eh? Interesting. My goodness. You can't actually mean that, old man. Well, I thought they were providing all kinds of good jobs for local people down there. Ugandans and Kenyans and Nigerians, etc. One belt, one road. All of these people are about to be shoved, kicking and screaming, or going perfectly on their own to Europe. They're being blocked in Libya. They're being blocked in Turkey. They're being blocked in all of these places. And yet they're still coming. Why is that, do you suppose?
Because it seemingly suits the powers that be in Western Europe that want the population replacement. And yet it also suits the Chinese, who basically want to cripple Western Europe with the debt and the issues that this would create, while
and yet the V4 are not crippled by them,
right? Quite,
because they have not allowed them to be introduced to their country.
And they could never have taken that stand unless they had a backup. And when they took that stand, the U.S. was still controlled by, the Clinton, Obama types. So I guess what you're saying, and it's a very good thing to take into consideration, the V4 could never have stood up to the EU in the way that they did unless China had been backing them.
Really? You don't suppose? How odd that is. A nice little pebble here, a nice little pebble there. Here a pebble, there a pebble, everywhere a pebble, pebble. Oh my goodness. Yeah. The V4 are playing China very well economically, influence-wise. They have got the perfect example of how to use China to, golly, stymie the Russians. And they've got us in the background going, yay, V4, yay, V4.
To stymie the expansionist, or I say unifying and integrating ambitions of the EU socialists.
Now we must decide who gets to put the most pebbles on the board in the V4. Or does the V4 get to put the pebbles on the board in the V4? This will determine whether or not Mr. Orban is shot. Well, it's a kinder, gentler, safer space, but let's be real about it. Viktor Orban is a thorn in everyone's side at this point. He has to be tolerated at least for a while longer. At least for a while. He's got to stand there until the EU collapses, which is going to be in the next 3 to 5 years.
Collapses at least in its current form.
Oh, it's going to collapse totally, I'm afraid. Totally. Currency, everything collapse. Bloop, bloop. Yes. It has nothing to sustain itself with. Nothing, especially when the United States pulls out of Germany. Germany does not realize how much of its economy rests on the United States.
Well, they're learning about it right now.
They're starting to, yes. Yes. But you see, we have managed to put the German government in a position that it cannot continue as it is now. Ms. Merkel has to go, and she's holding on with all 4 feet and her teeth. But there's nothing she can do about it. She's being slid to the edge of the glass plate. If Mama Merkel won't go, then Mama Merkel's going to have to be sent. And she's about to be sent.
So do you think that it's possible for Orban to navigate this? He strikes me as the kind of person who is well aware of what's happening.
Oh, he knows well what's happening. He knows very well what's happening. He has had a large hand in making it happen. Never confuse Viktor Orban with a standard Hungarian peasant. He's not. He is a man of great sensibilities and great good sense. And he knows that he is likely to be killed. But he makes nothing of it. He wants a future for his country. And he's fighting for it the only way he knows how. He is making everything have to dance to his tune. He goes to the EU, conducts these meetings, shakes these hands, does all of this nonsense, puts up with Juncker's drunkenness very, very well. Comes back to Hungary. Hungary is still safe. Nothing has gone wrong in Hungary, and everything has been Hungarianized in the EU.
And the Poles are now coming around. They're dealing, as we tapped upon at the outset, with picking the judicial ticks out of the fur of Poland, And they will soon, once this judicial aspect gets taken care of, it's much the same problem we're dealing with here. You know, there was obviously a global move made by people who recognized the judiciary as the place where they could, implant their
rule of law, son, rule of law.
Yes, taking control of it and thereby subverting it. But Poland looks like it's about to come out on the other side of that in a bit, and will be in a situation much closer to that of Hungary in terms of having consolidated the rule within their territory. Now, I've looked. I hate to say it, but I don't know as much about the Czech Republic and Slovakia because it's very important. You know, Czech Republic, Slovakia have, considerable industry, all kinds of skill with manufacture. They're highly developed economies. They do not seem to be, and again, this isn't my area, I haven't looked as closely, but they do not seem to be as far along in terms of having taken the steps internally. The attitude of the people within those countries seems to be well far along, and it seems to fit with the V4 attitude. But from what I can see, Slovakia and Czech Republic have not come as far in terms of that path to independence as Hungary and Poland have.
That's because they don't have the power. They don't have the power that Hungary and Poland have. Much smaller countries, much more divisible along ethnic lines.
And doubtless they've got, huge amounts of German economic tendrils, particularly in the Czech Republic, that shape that. What they can do and what they can't, what rate they can do it at.
How fast they can do it. But you see, everybody's having to realize that the world's getting very serious. We're about to move the U.S. bases out of Germany into Poland.
You think they'll do it?
I would love to see Mr. Trump do that. Would love to. I would love to see him leave vast realms of Germany in the dark, so the Germans realized exactly how much money Americans spent over there. Germany has no idea what its economy really rests on. They've got quite a bit to learn. They just never thought they'd have to. But I got news for them. What you've got to remember is that this whole nonsense is based on that three-legged stool we talked about. Now, Hungary and Poland, the Czech Republic, Yugoslav Republic, these
Slovakia.
are, I'm sorry, say again?
Slovakia, not
Slovakia, excuse me, I'm sorry. You must pardon me, I'm old. The Slovak Republic. All of these are merely a balancing act for that three-legged stool. That's all it is. They have come out against Russia, so to speak. Not really, but so to speak.
Not to a point where they will threaten in anger.
And at the same time, they have not come out in favor of China, so to speak.
And yet allowing them economically.
Absolutely. And having all manner of interesting things go on. How shall I say this? Economically and socially, I see a major thing in their lack of Confucian institutes in Hungary and Romania. Not Romania, Hungary and Poland and all these other places. Lack of Confucian institutes, which tells me the local governments have looked at them and said, ha 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 ha, no. Because Confucian institutes are, what do you know about Confucius, by the way?
Only that he is the classic normative social figure for the Chinese, and that it is entirely not religion. I mean, the Taoists are considered kind of wild and kept at bay because they tend to get a bit weird around the edges. And so, in terms of normative behavior for the Chinese, Confucius sort of set the standard, and it's all about hierarchy and family obligations.
Are you aware that the Confucians were very anti-military?
I'm not.
Well, you really ought to be. Confucius and Mencius were very anti-military. In fact, they denigrated, degraded, and derided military people throughout their reign. All the Confucian scholars constantly speak of virtue without military force. Interesting, isn't it, that the communist Chinese should come up with the Confucian Institute? That would need some more thought, I would think. I
will give it that thought.
We'll put this little pebble right here. Yeah.
Well, now we are coming up on a point where we would need to wrap in order to keep this clip to a manageable size. What is your closing summary for this question we sort of approached at the beginning, which is, what is the future of the V4?
Well, I think the future of the V4 is going to be very, very interesting. I think it's going to be loaded with any number of ways in which they could fall afoul of such things as money laundering, bribery, and state-sponsored corruption. But I do not think they will. I think they're going to be pressed with everything that the West, Russia, and China can bring to bear. But I think that Viktor Orban and the people in Poland have enough on the ball to realize what's being offered to them, that it's a poison pill.
So the trick is to keep the pulling by these three powers balanced so that nothing moves and nothing is ripped apart.
Exactly so. And I think that Viktor Orban will manage that, and I think the Polish people will manage it. I think the real worry comes in Yugoslav, the Yugos,
the Czech Republic and Slovakia.
The Czech Republic and the Slovakian Republic. Excuse me, I'm terribly sorry.
Yugoslav's further south.
There you are. I think that they will find themselves in a position of having to make decisions.
And soon, because they're also the key to splitting the V4, because if Germany can shove a wedge into Czech Republic and Slovakia, then they've sort of cut their way in between Hungary and Poland and broken that block.
But they will not be able to, because Hungary and Poland control these two countries. You see, the V4 is actually the V2, to put it bluntly. V4 is a misnomer. V2 is what it really is. Fine. I don't mind at all. I think that Viktor Orban should be declared the ruler of Poland and Hungary. But he is too smart for that. After all, Jesus Christ is Lord in Poland. Yay! I love it. Those Poles with their vast marches, torchlit parades, all of that sent a message to the world not to fuck with Poland. Viktor Orban has been very, very good at keeping Hungary exactly where it should be. I don't think he'll have any problems with it. I think the V4 will trundle along like a little house of fire. I think that Viktor Orban has about 5 years left on his life, and then he will be shot. But, well, you know, all the world loves a good martyr, eh?
You don't think it's possible for him to retire with grace?
I do not think it is possible for him to retire at all. I think he must be removed. Probably a lone gun nut will get him. You know, lone gun nut, like a lone dagger nut.
Right.
Right. It's always good. Goes back to Alexander. It's got a long and fruitful history, eh? Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
Well, I hope
there'll
that
be
does
no
not happen.
problems with that. Well, you may hope in one hand and shit in the other.
And see which one is full first, eh?
Exactly so, my friend. Exactly so. But that's a good many years off, and things change. Things change. It will depend on how soon China starts to see the pebbles in Africa shift their color. It will depend on how soon Europe gets its comeuppance, because it's going to. France and Germany, all these countries over there, Spain, they're going to be basically told, well, as Putin told them once before, if you wanted to burn wood, you'd have to buy the wood from us. It's very simple. Europe has nothing. Greece has nothing except the ability to burn its forest down around Athens and around the tourist areas so they can develop, because their development clauses in their various constitutions of one sort or another allow for no development, none. So this is how they will develop. They will burn things down, and then they have to come in and smooth things off again, don't they? Don't they? Yes. This whole 9 yards is so ridden and riddled with corruption as to make Viktor Orban and his Polish counterparts look like Christian gentlemen on their way to church. No, you will see nothing at all, except a balancing act from the V4, and it balances on a tripartite base. Very stable. Very stable. Poland's just brought in the United States. I wonder who Viktor Orban will bring in. About time for Viktor to make a move, is it not? He has got everybody in the EU balanced now. So now it's time to throw some imbalance in, is it not? We will see. We will see. I just want to watch the little pebbles hit the board.